It's about orienting your whole life around the three jewels of Buddhism, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and that being witnessed by other people who are doing the same. So when you ask for ordination, you sort of go on a journey and you sort of move in that direction of orienting your life around these three jewels. And for me, when I was on that journey myself, one of my working grounds was in this area of nihilism, this sense of what is the point of it all? And for me, it particularly came up in the area of friendship. I think I had a few experiences of falling out with friends and actually more friends moving away. And I often would find, well, what's the point of making this effort to be friends with people if eventually they're going to move away? And actually, to be honest, even ultimately they're going to die. That's what the Dharma teaches us as well. So I'd fall into kind of bleak periods, trying to grapple with this kind of conundrum. And in a way, it wasn't really until ordination that this has decisively been changed. And of course, it's not to say that I don't still work in that territory, but it's definitely been different since. So how has it been different? For me, receiving a visualization practice has made a huge difference. And that's what happens at ordination. You receive a visualization of a Buddha or a Bodhisattva figure. And I was given the practice of the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. And if you like, I was cultivating a connection with Avalokiteshvara before ordination, but at ordination, it was like being formally introduced. And I can't tell you the difference that has made to me. Cultivating that connection has just really made me feel existentially less alone. And to be clear, it's not as if I'm talking about suddenly hearing voices in my head, getting instructions from somewhere else, or having apparitions or anything like that. It's nothing external, or at least nothing obviously external, but there is a sense of something more than just me. So this is really, really hard to put into words. And I'm aware that Buddhism has more than its fair share of things like it's not this and it's not this either. And in some ways, I think my connection with Avalokiteshvara is sort of in that territory as well. So it's not that he's there ultimately, but it's not that he's just in my head either. But in a way, one way I find helpful to think about doing the visualization practice is a way of building a relationship with enlightenment itself. Because in a way, Avalokiteshvara is manifesting some qualities of enlightenment. He's said to be the Bodhisattva of compassion. He's got great compassion. So the more I develop that connection, the more I'm hopefully allowing that great compassion to manifest through me. And of course, that means I need to be interested, I need to be receptive, I need to be open and willing to engage in getting to know him. So just coming back to this actual term of self-surrender, in some ways I would almost prefer the word receptive. But of course, the actual phrase is surrender, self-surrender. And surrender is a very, very strong word. And it conjures up all kinds of images of like giving up, of really giving up. I mean, I think it's a military term, isn't it really? Like, you've surrendered, you're throwing the towel in. And in a way, that's, of course, what we need to do. We need to really give up our clinging to samsara, really give up our sense of ourselves as this or that. But of course, alongside that, the connotation of surrender also comes with this idea of defeat or failure. And I think that's also really interesting, because I think, at least for some of us, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but sometimes it nearly has to come to a sense of failure, of defeat, in order for me to actually be ready to let go. Yeah, sometimes be that extreme that you have to feel like you've no other choice. You're just going to have to give it up. So that's one way of looking at this myth, which might sound a bit combative. So I would just want to introduce another sort of paradigm here in terms of this idea of self-surrender, and bring in this idea of falling in love. Yeah, so falling in love is possibly another way of approaching this of this myth. So I'm sure at least some of us have had an experience of falling in love. even if it was just, even if it wasn't true love, maybe it was just infatuation or temporary insanity. I think actually even the term falling in love is interesting, like this idea of falling, you know, the sort of, yeah, it's not quite under your control. So like a bolt out of a blue, someone comes along and suddenly you can't concentrate, you can't eat, you can't sleep, you're sort of consumed by this person, you can't stop thinking about them, regardless of whether or not it's reciprocated, regardless of whether anything actually happens. It sort of feels like a magic spell. And so we are like Valentine, coming back to Valentine, who I mentioned at the beginning. Unless I look on Sylvia in the day, there is no day for me to look upon. She is my essence, and I leave to be, if I be not by her fair influence, fostered, illumined, cherished, kept alive. Yeah, so really strong stuff here, you know, really, really strong energy, wholeheartedness there. So when we think in terms of falling in love rather than in terms of surrender, well, there's less of a sense of failure here and more of a sense of service. Yeah, a sense of service, of willing service, of really wanting to serve something, a sense of being given meaning and purpose due to this other being. So Valentine is talking about Sylvia, who's a mortal woman, but what would it be like to fall in love with enlightenment? What would it be like to fall in love with the personification of enlightenment? So I'd just like to share a little bit of my experience. Actually, Vajrashur, maybe you could share this image of Padmasambhava now. So last autumn, I was on a study retreat at Adhisthana in the UK, and I was studying a text called Padmasambhava's Advice to the Three Fortunate Women Before Departure. So this is an image here of Padmasambhava. So this is his text we were studying, his advice. And over the course of that week, we spent delving into that text. And it's not a very long text, so we really got a chance to really kind of go in deep with it. So the text itself, Padmasambhava's Advice to the Three Fortunate Women Before Departure, is his instructions to some of his female disciples before he disappeared. So legend has it, Padmasambhava, a very mysterious kind of character, he headed then off into the land of the ogres to teach them the Dharma, and then he sort of passes out of sort of written history. So in this advice, it comes in two halves. The first half of his advice is advice to a queen, and she's largely given instructions on how to meditate, really beautiful instructions on how to meditate. But the second part of the advice, which is the part that really struck me, was advice to Yeshe Sogyal, who is one of his chief disciples, and also to Mangala, who is called a Dakini of joyousness. So a Dakini is a sky dancer. And the advice he gives to them is very strong advice on renunciation, very strong advice. I mean, I won't go into the things he says, but one of the things he says is, until death comes, do without whatever is unnecessary. Yeah, so that's the kind of territory he was in. But the final line of his advice was what really sort of landed on me in a particular way, was, do not fail to call on me, do not despair. And somehow it felt to me like that advice was personal to me, even though it clearly wasn't. But somehow it landed on me at that time. And I was having this experience of a friend of mine who I'm very close to was moving away at that time. And I was really grappling with this. And that line landed on me in a particular way. It somehow felt like Padmasambhava was reaching out, telling me something important, something that I really needed to hear. And, you know, maybe you've had an experience of something like this. You know, sometimes people talk about this, you know, they're at a Dharma talk maybe, and it's about, I don't know, whatever it's about. And then in the middle of the talk, the speaker actually says something, and it almost feels like you're a bit like, was that person talking to me? How do they know that? You know, it can be quite strong. In fact, it can be a little bit eerie. It can really feel a bit eerie. You know, we talk a lot about wanting to be seen, and sometimes it's a bit strange when that being seen is sort of almost impersonal. Yeah, so I think there is something mysterious about that. That advice that I felt I was being given by Padmasambhava felt completely personal to me, but also completely universal as well. Completely universal to anyone who's ever been parted from someone that they love. So on this retreat, we were doing, as I said, we're doing a lot of study. And then one evening we had this very simple ritual, reading out that text in the shrine room and then chanting Padmasambhava's mantra. And afterwards, I was left in the shrine room and I felt like I had just fallen in love. Now, that might sound a little bit crazy, but there you are. This is the Dharma life. And I don't really want to explain this experience away or rationalize it or apologize for it. All I can say was that I was left with a very, very strong sense of his presence and of his qualities. And it didn't feel like it was something I was consciously doing either. It felt more in the territory of captivation, of enchantment, of magic. And to be perfectly frank, my conscious rational self was never particularly interested in Padmasambhava. To me, he always felt like a bit of a roguish character, a bit of a sort of charismatic chancer even. So yeah, it was a bit surprising. But this connection with Padmasambhava has really opened me up to qualities that I am trying to cultivate. A fierce confidence in the Dharma, a willingness to go beyond conventions, and even just this idea of freedom. Yeah, it really evokes that for me, freedom. So what's interesting about this falling in love experience is that it's opened me up to qualities that, my conscious self doesn't really associate with me. Qualities like spontaneity and a compassion that can look quite fierce. So that's just my personal experience. I just wanted to share that with you. And I don't know if that's useful for you or gives you a sense of what I'm talking about when I say falling in love with enlightenment or the embodiment of enlightenment. So here you really give up your sense of your usual self. You even give up ideas of what your usual self might look like to allow room for something that's beyond that. Something of the nature of enlightenment to shine through. So like falling in love, you open your heart and you allow enlightenment in. So as I've already said, it's hard to be receptive. And personally, I've been aware quite a lot, perhaps in my work in particular, that there's been a lot of discussions recently about how to have difficult conversations. And what's come up quite a lot actually in relation to this is people needing to be more willing to listen rather than to be speaking all the time. And I think that's interesting because I think we generally, probably humans, are more lean towards being active, and we could do with being a lot more receptive at times. And developing a relationship with a Buddha or a Bodhisattva figure can really help with this. In a way, it's a relationship that's at once personal, deeply personal, but at the same time, it's universal. So Avalokiteshvara and Padmasambhava aren't my own special friends. I have no particular claims on them. And in a way, if you fall in love with a Buddha or a Bodhisattva figure, just to make a case for doing that, it's the best kind of falling in love, because you really are falling in love with enlightenment. You're falling in love with the three jewels. And just remember that the three jewels are true refuges. They won't ever let you down. You won't have any unrequited love. There's no star-crossed lovers, no Shakespearean tragedy, which is wonderful. And for me, the relationship I have with both of these figures, Avalokiteshvara and Padmasambhava, have really helped with that sense of existential loneliness. Yeah, that sense of having a separate self. So as we know, the Dharma teaches that we aren't separate, that we are fundamentally connected. But sometimes that just sounds like words. It can just feel like words or things that we say to others. Really, humans, we are relational. We need someone to look up to. And the Buddha acknowledged that when he talked about, after his enlightenment in the Gaurava Sutta, the need for having something to revere, the need to have something to look up to. In fact, he said it was painful not to have something to look up to. And for me, both Avalokiteshvara and Padmasambhava embody qualities that I would like to cultivate. I look up to them as they hold those qualities that I aspire to. And it's really hard to move in the abstract towards the qualities of compassion and wisdom without sort of seeing them embodied somehow, even if it's in archetypal forms. So in a way, coming back to this term surrender, self-surrender, in some ways, this idea of surrender is a useful metaphor, because in a way we're admitting that we aren't in control, we aren't in charge of everything, and that there are things beyond our reckoning. And there's a great wonder in that too. The myth of self-surrender comes with an appreciation of the mystery at the heart of life. So again, just in the way that, you know, when you fall in love with a person, they seem marvelous and exciting because they're yet to be revealed to you. We can have that experience as well with cultivating a relationship with enlightenment. This myth brings with it a sense of magic. And it sort of brings to mind lines from a poem by Louis MacNeice, a poem called Snow, where he's talking about being in a room and looking out at the snow outside. And he says, "World is crazier and more of it than we think, incorrigibly plural." And then his final line, "There is more than glass between the snow and the huge roses." And I just think that's so beautiful. It really evokes that quality of something more. Yeah, just something. And it doesn't even say what it is, but just more than glass. Yeah, so more than glass between the snow and the huge roses. So yeah, that's a little bit about self-surrender, but obviously I just want to also bring in this idea of the back of the myth, because there can be some dangers to this myth as well. And to be frank, probably the biggest danger here is us and our literal minds. Yeah. So you might be hearing me say this, talking about this experience of falling in love with an embodied or an embodiment of enlightenment. And you might be hearing me say, oh, well, there's like a bodhisattva up in the sky and you need to open up and surrender to that. And, you know, understandably, if that's what you're hearing, you might feel a little bit threatened at the thought of some entity that's just going to come down and take you over. Or maybe you don't, maybe you feel like that's wonderful for reasons of your own. But either way, it's not quite like that. If we think that there's something ultimately out there, it's quite likely that we're just going to fall into passivity. I might just think, well, you know, I don't really need to make an effort in my meditation because Padmasambhava is going to come along and sort me out. He's going to, you know, make sure my mind is whatever. You know, we might stop making an effort. There's also a danger that we might end up just in a fantasy world. You might start daydreaming about this other world. You know, you're hanging out with the Buddha and it's great. And, you know, you don't really connect it with your actual life or the people that are actually around you. You know, this can end up just being something that's kind of nice, a nice sort of hideout from reality, a bit of transcendental escapism, if you like. Yeah, so that's another danger, living in a fantasy. But there's also another danger is that in some cases, rather than it being something like cultivating a connection with an archetypal figure, it can be we can be cultivating this myth, this idea of self-surrender in relation to another person. You know, it might be someone we really look up to and someone who embodies some wonderful qualities for us. And we sort of have this sense of openness, complete openness and complete receptivity to them. And then, you know, when they sort of semi-inevitably, you know, manifest their imperfections in the world, we can end up feeling a bit betrayed by that. So it's a really tricky thing to do, to look up to somebody, really look up to somebody, be open to their positive qualities, and allow them to be imperfect as well. Yeah, it's not easy, not an easy thing to do. So I would say these are all things to be on the lookout for as you explore this myth. So I've talked quite a bit about my connection with bodhisattva figures, and but how might we put this into practice in other ways? Because this mightn't be something that you're particularly familiar with, Buddhas and bodhisattva figures. So I just thought it'd be worth reminding us that in case this is sounded quite abstract, that we do use the myth of self-surrender right from the beginning of our Dharma lives. You really don't have to have a visualization practice in order to get something out of this. So the first thought I had, the first memory I've had, was on the first meditation course I was on, when we came to that part of, talking about the hindrances, which I know we were looking at a little bit earlier. You had several antidotes that were suggested to these hindrances. Cultivating the opposite, sky-like mind, and so on. But one of them was called going for refuge, or at least it was called that when I was doing meditation course. I actually think it's changed since. I was looking at the notes recently, and it says having a bigger perspective. But I remember reading this thing about going for refuge as an antidote in meditation, and finding it just a little intriguing and a bit mysterious. Particularly because it was the one that you do when all the other ones don't work. So as I said, now it's paraphrased as taking a bigger perspective and remembering that we have the potential to grow and develop. But it is really interesting. It's the thing we do when the other antidotes haven't worked. And in some ways, it's interesting because it is when the incentive is greatest to do something. If nothing else is working, we have a really strong incentive to go beyond ourselves. So in that regard, I would just say despair can be an interesting experience, that sometimes it really opens us up to helping us really let go of something that's getting in our way. And so maybe don't always be afraid of that experience of despair. It can be, you can actually just be on the cusp of something else if you really kind of are able to embrace that and just go beyond it. I mean, it's easier said than done, of course, but just to throw that in there. So that's one thing, this idea of going for refuge. Of course, probably a more obvious way in which we work on the myth of self-surrender is by doing pujas. So very fortunately, we are going to have a chance to do this not that long. So puja can really help with this attitude of self-surrender. So puja, this devotional ritual, is said to be one of the ways to bring the bodhicitta, the will to enlightenment, into being. And I think we could really make more of this. So I would say, I mean, obviously not all of you might have an experience of doing puja, but I think quite a few of us do. And I would just ask, do we have a sense of really opening up and something going beyond ourselves when we're doing puja, or do we resist it a little bit? So obviously at the beginning, we need to have a bit of time to find out what puja is all about and what it signifies. But beyond a certain point, we really just have to give ourselves to puja. Otherwise, it will only ever be just a set of words. Yeah, so we really have to, give ourselves to it to get something from it. So could we take this a little bit more seriously when we do puja? Could we really bring in an attitude of openness and curiosity? So maybe coming back again to this idea of falling in love. So imagine you were going on a date. You'd probably dress up, you want to look your best. You might even want to bring a gift to indicate to the person that you like them, you're thinking of them. Well, in a way, you can do all these things with the puja as well. How wonderful. You can dress up. You can make offerings to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. You can be really wholehearted. And even more than that, you can just be really present. Yeah. Being really present, not sort of vaguing out, not just going through the motions, but really being in your heart while you're doing it. So as I said, we will have a chance to put this into practice in a little while. So, just dropping that in. There's still time. I think there'll be a little break where you could, maybe get dressed up if you wanted. Just saying. Yeah, and another way of cultivating this sort of orientation of self-surrender is by being more receptive to your spiritual friends. So when I say spiritual friends, that might sound very, I don't know, jargon-like, but I really just mean people who have your best interests, a sense of your growth and development at their heart, whether or not you would use that term, spiritual friends or not. So obviously here we have to be careful, because we're not trying to cultivate sort of an abdication of responsibility to somebody else. But, just worth paying attention sometimes. Often we don't really listen to our friends. We don't really listen to someone who's telling us something for our own benefit, because we're just so sure that we are right. Or we might think we are being receptive. We might think we're receptive to our friends, but really we're only sort of receptive to them when they're saying the things that we want them to say, and we sort of phase out the bits that they're not. So yeah, it's just worth paying attention, worth noticing. Do you habitually listen to you? Do you take it on board? I mean, it's not that you have to do what they're saying, but do you kind of really take it seriously? And it's not just about taking on advice either. This idea of self-surrender can be about just being receptive to the sort of person, the qualities of our good friend. Everyone has really positive qualities, and a lot of the times people can be a little bit further along than we are in certain regards, and we can be open to that and allow it, those qualities to influence us as well. I have a friend who's just really wonderful at being appreciative of when she gets gifts. And no matter what you give her, no matter how small, she will always it's like you've just given her treasure. And it's such a lovely quality, and it's something that I feel like I would like to be more like myself. So I've really been trying to open up to how she does that, and just try and, to be positively influenced by that. And of course, there are other ways to cultivate this attitude of self-surrender. You can think in terms of service. How can you serve a situation? How can you serve another person? How can you serve the Dharma? And this idea of service might come a bit more naturally to some of us rather than other of us, but I think we can all really develop this. I think we can all really develop this open up to sort of being the person who just does what needs to be done, rather than the person who does what they want to do, if you know what I mean. And similarly, generosity can be a really good way of opening to something beyond ourselves, as well as its counterpart, gratitude. So they're just to drop them in there as well. We don't really have time to go into them too much. So just to quickly summarize that, in terms of ways we can explore this myth, we can always keep in mind that bigger perspective that we can grow and develop, and just be really open to that potential. We can practice puja really wholeheartedly. We can be receptive to our friends, maybe a bit more receptive to their advice, but certainly more receptive to their qualities. And maybe cultivating an attitude of service and cultivating gratitude and generosity. So just a few final words. So the myth of self-surrender is really pointing to the importance of giving yourself to a higher dimension of reality. And, for some people that mightn't sound too appealing, but in a way, really, we're just trying to realize that we're not fully in control of a situation. So the journey towards enlightenment isn't just about striving ever onwards. It's as much about opening yourself to what's beyond you and allowing yourself to be influenced by that, allowing yourself to be influenced by enlightenment. And if we don't do that, we're actually just limiting what enlightenment can be to just what we can imagine right now. So it is really important that we open ourselves to something beyond where we currently are. And the myth of self-surrender flows quite naturally from the myth of self-development. And personally, I don't think you can ever really leave the myth of self-development behind fully, unless maybe you're enlightened, which I'm not, so I'm not leaving this one behind anytime soon. But on that basis of working on yourself, practicing ethics, meditating consistently, cultivating friendship, and so on, you can really open up to the qualities of enlightenment and let them permeate you. So, I mean, I've mentioned a few ways in which we can do that, but another way just to mention is this idea of being more open to allowing a sense of the Buddha in your life. Yeah. So one way you might do this is rather than trying to do the metta bhavana in a particular way, you could imagine having the Buddha there with you and him sort of the metta just flowing from him and permeating that experience. So this myth brings with it beauty, wonder, and magic. And obviously you have to be careful not to bring the literal mind in here too much. So I just have this memory of when I was younger, I was a really big fan of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. But anyway, on occasion, I used to hop into this rosewood wardrobe that my parents had in the spare bedroom. And I can see Dee laughing here. And I would wait, patiently for Narnia to open up so I could enter. And I'm sad to say that it never happened. And I never regretted doing that, but it never actually happened for me. And I think what's interesting about that is, it's sort of a lesson to remember to be careful of your expectations, to watch your expectations of what might actually happen. Don't be looking for something to deliver what it can't. But on the other hand, we have to be aware of the effect of what we believe, what we are open to. And, that really does have an effect on us. It has an effect on our lives. It has an effect on how we are in the world. And for me, the great lesson, the great antidote to this existential loneliness is remembering and being open to the connection we have with enlightenment, whatever that looks like for you right now. And always keeping in mind that we can be in touch with enlightenment if we just surrender ourselves to it, or even if we just fall in love with it. So I just want to finish again with those words from Padmasambhava, that the final advice to his advice to the 3 fortunate women before departure. Do not fail to call on me. Do not despair. So that is it. And I will hand back to Vajrashura, I think.
Sorry, just getting myself unmuted. Wonderful, wonderful talk. Well done, Sadayasihi. Thank you for that. A real lion's roar of her passion for self-surrender. There's so many good lines in there that I just want to go back to again. Yeah, just remaining open to something beyond ourselves. I think you've already set us up really, really well for the puja. So a wonderful talk. Thank you very, very much for that. Yep, great. So what we'll do now is we will have a break for just over. Why don't we meet back at 8:30, 8:30, ready to go. And Pavra will lead us then in the puja, which Sadayasihi has so brilliantly set us up for, and we'll have an opportunity to really throw ourselves into self-surrender, really recklessly throw ourselves into self-surrender, I would say. I think Sadayasihi has really set us up so well for that now. So thank you again, Sadayasihi.